Hello there, everybody. So recently, I discovered that a response video was made to my video. Where do tech bros get their ideas from, etc. Right? And I wanted to respond to this video because there were some comments in it that I feel that are appropriate for me to respond to. And I want to first kind of give a bit of an introduction about why I run my channel the way that I do, and some of the things that I do, whatever. So first, I wanted to say that my channel is focused on the work of specifically Félix Guattari, right? And the reason why I'm interested in Félix Guattari is because Guattari, I learned about Guattari when I was first starting to get basically schizophrenic, right? Now, technically, I'm diagnosed with bipolar 1 with manic psychosis, right? Which means that when I get manic, I go crazy, right? But to most amateur psychiatrists, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between, my psychosis that I experienced in 2020 and 2021 from what a schizophrenic would experience. And that was a continuous psychotic episode that lasted for almost 18 to 24 months. Like, that was a very intense experience. And at the beginning of that experience, I was exposed to Félix Guattari specifically through his screenplay, A Love of Weak, right? Which is a very unusual angle to get into Guattari. Most people get into him through Anti-Oedipus, which is a totally different way to get into him. A Love of Weak is a lot more accessible if you want to, get started with that. I mean, it's kind of like amateur hour with writing like a screenplay, but it's enjoyable. There's a lot of good things in it. So, but yeah, to stress, the reason why I'm into Guattari is not because I'm trying to establish some kind of like ideology or anything like that. It's because I'm schizophrenic, and it's because Guattari understands schizophrenics, and the erasure of the schizophrenic subject from Deleuze studies is a huge problem, right? I went to DG camp actually last year in the Netherlands, and something that really stuck out to me was there was way more discussion about people doing drugs than schizophrenics. And that's upsetting. Apparently we don't matter even though we're in the fucking, subtitle of the series. Like, it's not capitalism and druggies, it's capitalism and schizophrenia, right? And there's a reason for that. And that's because schizophrenia, it doesn't stop. You don't come down from the high. It just keeps going and going and going, and you keep deterritorializing. And it's very interesting because as I experienced that, the theory that Guattari was proposing, and mind you, I came into this without any knowledge of, all this philosophy stuff. Like, Deleuze is still kind of over my head because of all of the metaphysics that he references. I knew some things about Freud and psychology from the past, but like for the most part, I was kind of going in completely, without like a huge background. I established that background over time as I tried to understand this guy that was central to my experience with psychosis. And, it really bothers me that, somebody who really understood psychosis and really believed in psychotic people, there is literally a interview where Guattari says something along the lines of, like, why is it that we don't respect the philosophical production of, like, Schreber or Otrad? Yeah, like, why is it that the schizo is so dirty? Why do we have to be caged in this sort of psychiatric, prison in order to exist within the discourse of academia? And for that reason, I've been trying to make, Guattari more accessible. And interestingly enough, some of the people that are heavily involved with, kind of establishing a sort of Guattari studies, right, as opposed to Deleuze and Guattari studies, are schizophrenic, right, or have experienced schizophrenia. They may be stable now, but they're on medication, right? So, with that out of the way, right, to make very clear my intentions with the channel, I want to first reply to this comment, right? And so, I'll just read it directly. He says, Punish Felix recently did a video titled, Where Did Tech Bros Get Their Ideas From?, which I will link in the description. The user Nilnabrius asked that I watch the hour-long video in order to get my opinion on the piece. Overall, while I dislike the jargon that the video uses, the concerns posed in it are valid and match many of the concerns we have made on this channel. I started typing up a response to the video and planned on just posting my response as a comment, but soon it became an essay, which was a bit too long to post in the comment section without getting flagged as spam. So I decided to make this video in response. I'm not going to cover everything in this video, just some things that stood out to me during my initial watch. Now, I will say that I do get pretty frustrated from the jargon thing, because I feel like if you are reading Guattari in the first place, it shouldn't be jargon. I'm using the same terms that Guattari is using. Right? Like, if you are actually reading, even if you're reading Deleuze and Guattari, these terms are not jargon. These terms are part of the discourse within Deleuze and Guattari, which kind of, like, whenever people make this claim, it's fine if it's somebody who is not familiar with, Deleuze and Guattari. They're just new to it, they don't understand that they use a lot of weird words. But when you are clearly focusing your channel on works that are influenced by Deleuze and Guattari, you should know better. It's not jargon, okay? And if you think it's jargon, I think that's an indication that you may need to improve your reading, right? Because I can't even really think of a single instance in that particular video where I'm using a term that could be considered jargon that is not, like, referenced by Guattari. All right, there could be one or two, but most of the terms that people usually think are jargony are the ones from Guattari. And this kind of reflects more like probably the lack of this author, or the lack of this creator's experience with Guattari. And to that I suggest, well, read Guattari. Why are you not reading the source material, right? If you're concerned about the semiotics produced by Deleuze and Guattari, well, the semiotics comes from Guattari, right? Like, that's like, I don't know how to explain that. It's literally, yeah. So, okay. So let's first talk about the Chomsky-Faurisson affair. The commentary on Chomsky that Punish Felix, PF, going forward, lacks a fundamental understanding of what Chomsky was doing in regard to Faurisson. Chomsky believes in freedom of speech, regardless of whether or not he agrees with your ideas being expressed by a particular person. There is an old saying by Evan Beatrice Hall, who wrote on Voltaire, I disapprove of what you're going to say, but I will defend to the death of whether or not he agrees with the ideas being expressed by a particular person. Oh, wait, whoops. Let me reread that, sorry. Got confused. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Chomsky was defending freedom of speech, not agreeing with Faurisson's claims in terms of denying that the Holocaust happened. So to be clear, I do not say in the video at any point that Chomsky agrees with Faurisson. I just said that he, put his battles in a bad place. And I'll explain more once I finish this comment, but I want to stress, I never said that Chomsky was a Nazi. I never said that Chomsky agrees with Faurisson, and I never said that Chomsky was, like, even aligned with his beliefs. My intention with that part of the video, which has received the most criticism and I think could have been better, is really more so that Chomsky is immature and chooses really poor battles to, line his career with. And really, I should have explained a bit more than just in a short gag what that means, right? But I don't think my video at any point implies that Chomsky agrees with Faurisson, right? It just says that he defended Faurisson. And yeah, so let's continue. And though a person may be ignorant of history, it does not make them an anti-Semite, which is Chomsky's point. This I disagree with. Faurisson was a historian, right? And he was a historian that presented a narrative that explicitly said that the gas chambers do not exist. If you are a historian, you have a responsibility to not be ignorant of history when you make a publication like that. And when you make a publication like that, you need to, like, Faurisson was not just some random guy. He was a historian who. And the reason why this is important is because anti-Semitic people and neo-Nazis will reference Faurisson as a historian, just like how anti-vax people reference Andrew Wakefield as a scientist, right? Like, Faurisson has a responsibility to uphold a level of honesty in his work. So it's very questionable that he is defending the non-existence of the gas chambers, right? Again, that doesn't mean that Noam Chomsky agrees with him. He's just defending his freedom of speech, which is accurate. But this is not some ignorant idiot on who made a discussion. This is a historian, okay? That is a problem, right? That is what people had an issue with. Let's not make up history while we're talking about this, okay? It's very obvious to anybody who actually reads about the Faurisson affair that Faurisson was not just some random person. He was a historian, right? While people can disagree with what Chomsky wrote, claiming that, as PF noted, he support the genocide is rather ignorant, especially when we look at all the political work Chomsky has done in his long life fighting against oppression and imperial power. So I will say that me saying that him defending genocide was the incorrect word. I think a more accurate word would be dismissive or minimizing, right? Essentially what happened was with the Bosnian genocide, and I can't remember, I think it was the Rwandan genocide, I can't remember on the top of my head. Basically what he was arguing was that technicality, these are genocides. And I think that it doesn't matter how starred your past is with like how your activism worked or whatever. I think that is still not defensible. Like, you can make a mistake and be criticized for it. Like, let's go back to Guattari, for example. Guattari cheated on his wife for a horrible person, right? And he dragged his children into that. I think it's fair to criticize Guattari for that, right? Like, just because he did that doesn't invalidate all of the other work that he did regarding feminism and regarding, queer rights and stuff like that. But he still made a mistake that we should call out and criticize, right? Like, it doesn't make it okay just because he had like a good past. And in my opinion, I think that Chomsky's like anti-imperialism work is quite weak, to be quite frank. Like, I feel like there's a reason why people don't call themselves political Chomskyans in 2025 most of the time. It's because we've moved on from Chomsky, okay? Chomsky was valuable in like the Bush era, right? When people would just believe whatever they saw on the news in reaction to 9/11. Manufacturing consent was an important aspect of like radicalizing a generation, right? I wasn't necessarily influenced by it directly, but I watched that influence, right? I watched that impact, happen. I lived it, okay? So, Chomsky was important in that, but that doesn't make him, that doesn't, one, excuse him from saying those things, and two, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that he's a great leftist. He's kind of a shit leftist. I mean, he's spent a large part of his career essentially like being really immature about these French linguists, right? He didn't do his research on any of these people. He let Bricmont completely shape his ideas on how these people work. And like I pointed out in that video, Bricmont had a very political reason to disagree with these with the May 1968 leftists. He had a completely different vision of socialism than they did, right? And as a result, he had absolutely every motivation to lie and misrepresent to Chomsky how the situation looked. And instead of, actually validating those claims, Chomsky instead, relied on his gut feeling on how he reacted to figures like Foucault and Lacan in order to shape his opinion. And he was incredibly irresponsible. That's terrible, right? Like, most other leftists don't go as far as Chomsky as to literally try to burn down an entire opposing field of thought in a completely irresponsible and poorly researched manner. Chomsky directly contributed to the Sokal affair, okay? Like, that's not excusable. And to be blunt, Sokal is a pseudoscientist. I'm going to say that right now. I'm doing my call out post on Sokal. Sokal is a pseudoscientist who made up linguistics and yet and goes around and has been telling lies for the last 25 years about this situation, about like this stupid fabrication that he made up back in the 90s, and he still does it, by the way. And why is Chomsky defending him? He's a linguist. He should know better. Sokal is not a linguist. Sokal is a dumb reactionary. Okay, so let's continue. Regardless, as PF rightly claimed, language, Chomsky, is instinctually and biologically beset upon the human species, which Chomsky has, he exemplifies through his poverty of stimulus argument. For Chomsky's opinion on large language models, I would recommend PF check out the interview. Noam Chomsky speaks on what ChatGPT really is good for, which I've linked in the description. I have read that interview, and I have commented already on my in the comment section. He may have not have seen that. Also, in terms of the Faurisson affair, I would recommend PF read the Faurisson affair on Chomsky's page as well, which I will also link. Again, I don't think that Chomsky is a Nazi, but I do think that he made a very bad battle. So to explain this a little bit more clearly, so if you watch my video, or you can also just read on my website, I post all of my scripts for my major videos on my website so that anybody can read them at any time. If you read that script, right, for Cinema of Desire, I make an important argument against freedom of speech, right? Now, first off, I'm not saying that the state should regulate speech, right? Which is, by the way, I can't think of a single country that does not have the state regulating speech. Even in America, the state is regulating speech, okay? But, and that's happening a lot more frequently, right? And I am not in favor of the state regulating speech. I think that people should regulate speech. However, I am not in alignment with the idea that freedom of speech is just this thing that everybody should agree with, right? And the reason why is because I'm a Guattarian. I am interested in what machines are producing, right? So what I argue in that video of Cinema Desire, which is referencing Guattari's essay, Cinema of Desire, right? In that essay, Guattari is talking about pornography, right? And he states in that essay, basically, that, you know, it's not just a matter of opening the floodgates for freedom of speech, right? It's not just a matter of allowing for anything to come into production, because you're not changing the machines that are actually, you know, fascistic. You're just opening the floodgates and you're saying it's okay. So instead of repressing fascism, you're just letting it open, right? That's not a solution, right? That's not an answer. The answer is to analyze what speech is producing, right? And this kind of goes back to why it was a bad idea for Chomsky to do this. He should have thought more about what this situation is producing as opposed to anything. And this is why I don't think it's an excuse, right? I understand that Chomsky, you know, believes that he was fighting for freedom of free speech. I get that. I'm not stupid, right? I've read all this shit, right? It's just that I don't agree with him. Like, it was a bad choice on his regard, you know. He shouldn't have done that. And the reason, and it had real material consequences. Because of that, Chomsky had basically destroyed his possibility of influencing French leftism for decades, because his politics, nobody wanted to read Chomsky in France, because the French were literally occupied by the Nazis, right? They weren't going to have time for this, you know, fucking, you know, historical revisionist bullshit, right? You know, yeah, okay, Chomsky may have been defending freedom of speech, but, you know, yeah, like, it doesn't come without consequences. He was not just, it's not just this ideal that we should be allowed to say whatever we want. It's a part of a larger machine. What is being produced here, right? And as somebody who focuses their channel on, like, people that reference Deleuze and Guattari, so I would expect you to have read some of Deleuze and Guattari, this should be a question that should be on your mind. What is the machine producing, right? Why, you know what I'm saying? And for this moment, I want to also talk a bit about Jean Bricmont, because unlike Chomsky, Jean Bricmont has a lot of red flags. So Jean Bricmont, when I was doing my research for compiling the images used in the video, I discovered mind you, I knew about Bricmont's comments on the Holocaust, right? And I knew about his comments on some other things, but I hadn't really pulled the narrative together until I started to really get all of the pictures to show people the screen caps, right? Jean Bricmont has a consistent, and I mean very consistent, reputation of defending, in particular, the claim that the gas chambers didn't exist. Pretty much every single person that he defends and says, oh my god, they're oppressing free speech, blah, 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 it's always some guy who's denying the gas chambers. Which, to me, I think that if you're a free speech advocate, don't you think that, the things that you would focus on are a little bit more diverse than a very specific controversial claim that most leftists would not really want to engage with directly? There's plenty of cases of the government suppressing freedom of speech. You don't need to rely on this particular example over and over and over again. It's very suspicious. Okay? And while Noam Chomsky, in my opinion, is more just kind of like a doofus that made bad choices and was very unprofessional in his approach to dealing with postmodernism, Bricmont is highly suspect. It really makes you wonder why this guy consistently, and I mean consistently, defends this particular claim. It really does feel like he actually does believe in it. Now, that's my opinion. Only Bricmont really knows. But that's kind of the vibes he's giving, okay? So let's go into the second thing, right? Escaping semiotics. For postmodernism, grand narratives are deconstructed through the ambivalence of the word to create multiple meta-narratives, Derrida, resulting in endless interpretations. Deleuze, however, was somewhat unique, going beyond language and semiotics and the regime of signs, which he felt were too organized, leading to an ordered regime where everything has a specific identity or identicality to it. This is why Deleuze prefers the game of Go over something like chess, dealing with deterritorialized spaces and difference. Example, a Go stone can move anywhere, blah, 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 which leads to nomadic lines of flight to the outside, escaping capture, as it were. It's also why Deleuze loved the works of Lewis Carroll so much, due to the nonsensical nature of his works. Okay, that's good. That's fine. Either way, pluralities and multiplicities emerge in either system. D and G attack Chomsky due to its root-like tree models, preferring, of course, their own rhizomatic structure, which opposes the root or top-down hierarchical models. Okay, yeah, that's fair. Still, it appears in modern-day society the rhizome was not enough to liberate man from capture. That, in my opinion, I think that the reason why is because, well, I mean, like I said with Deleuze studies does not really embrace the schizophrenic, so it's not really rhizomatic, right? Pretty much all of the work that has been produced by Deleuze studies goes back, and the actual production of what Deleuze studies has created goes back to arboreal constructs. I think a really classic example would be the IDF using, nomadology to essentially, as part of their military tactics. They're just recapturing their interpretation of Deleuze into an arboreal model. This is not rhizomatic. And in fact, I already criticized this in the video when I'm talking about what Bifo said about post-media, right? So basically, if you don't remember, Bifo argues in his book, Félix Guattari, Visionary, whatever, Friend, Visionary, I don't remember the subtitle. In that book, he's talking about his experiences with Félix Guattari, and in one of the interviews, he suggests that Guattari predicted the internet, right? And I'm pretty sure that Bifo has moved on from this belief because he said this in the mid-2000s, and a lot has changed since then, and I'm sure he has a completely different conceptualization of the internet. But I disagree that Guattari was actually predicting the internet, right? Guattari instead was trying to formulate something called post-media, right? Which is a concept where essentially instead of having a centralized, production of media, right? So instead of having these companies that produce stuff like movies and things like that for a populace, he believed that it would be possible to have this kind of decentralized media production. But clearly we don't live in that, right? Because we live in the world of YouTube. We live in the world where BuzzFeed, the creator of BuzzFeed, read Deleuze and thought, how can I make this the most arboreal shit on the planet, right? How can I make money off of this, right? And this is part of the reason why it's important to integrate the schizophrenic into Deleuze studies, right? Because otherwise, you have no mechanism to even understand how to approach a rhizomatic, way of thinking, right? You're just going to resort back to using this ontology to essentially create, these arboreal structures, right? And I noticed that he is not discussing Guattari, in particular, his criticism of postmodernism, which is what I was referencing in that particular essay. It's in the preliminary chapters or first chapters of Schizoanalytic Cartographies. And Schizoanalytic Cartographies is a really hard book, but that particular segment is pretty easy to understand. If you understand all of this, you can understand what Guattari is saying about postmodernism, right? And what Guattari is saying about postmodernism is that they don't escape, this arboreal structure, right? They just repeat the same problems of structuralism. They literally are just copying and pasting. That's why Guattari is so critical of Lyotard and Baudrillard in that essay, because they don't innovate. They don't produce anything new. And that was the whole point of that segment. And, you should read Guattari instead of just reading Deleuze and Guattari, because that's the problem. That's the whole point of my video, that you should read Guattari, right? So let's continue here. I think we can see the main problem with the Dark Enlightenment ideals is that it leads to more organized systems of power serving the elite and oligarchic institutes it was meant to help escape from. I don't think, I agree with this mostly, but I don't think that the Dark Enlightenment was trying to escape from anything. I think the Dark Enlightenment was more a repetition of racist, colonialist ideals. And I think that's really exemplified by the fact that most people kind of tend to push the minorities involved in that, especially like Sadie Plant, to the side. Like, people are way more interested in what this white guy has to say about fucking like his stupid techno babble bullshit than what Sadie Plant had to actually say about women in cybernetics and computers. And it's pretty frustrating, actually, when I first got involved, because I lived as a woman for 22 years, and it was so fun reading that, the one person that is actually interesting in the CCRU, sorry, Mark Fisher fans, but I'm not a huge fan of Fisher. Sorry. He's all right. He's not terrible. He's not like a fascist or anything. I just don't really care for him that much. But Sadie Plant is just completely ignored. And I think the reason why is because, again, this isn't an escape from anything. That's kind of my point. The CCRU wasn't about trying to escape from anything. It was a cyber LARP. Because if they were trying to escape from something, they would care about what the schizo said instead of pretending to be schizophrenic. Schizo LARPing is suicide, okay? And don't become schizophrenic to try to escape capitalism. Jesus fucking Christ. Listen to schizophrenics. Treat schizophrenics like they are important to the discourse. They are literally what your discourse is based on. And yet it's been 50 years and people don't understand that, right? Okay, so social media, which is run by algorithms and controlled by a major tech corporation, used memes of virtual potential to promote elitist propaganda, which ended up shaping our reality, driving us towards a techno-dystopia led on by MAGA, Trump, and the tech bros. Yeah, I agree with that. And meme culture and social media has done little else but spread misinformation and propaganda. Yeah, okay. COVID was also helpful in shaping consensus due to isolation and social distancing, whereby social media influencers gain more influence, further spreading their misinformation while proving to be effective propaganda outlets, whether knowingly or not influenced unconsciously, or dare we say, by an occult or an unknown force from the outside. With these nodes under corporate control, Terrell Corp comes just like Land said it would. I don't know who Terrell Corp is. I've never heard of that guy. Linked not only to his ideal vision of the world he wanted, but linked in his initially in his earlier works to the outer nominal will. I will say that I agree that I should have included more about how, like, the developments in the last 8 years, especially COVID, did accelerate these problems. So I do agree with that, and I do think that's a gap in my discussion. While acceleration has been hijacked for propaganda purposes via social media and oligarchic tech bros, disagree entirely. Accelerationism was shit from the beginning. And the reason why it was shit from the beginning is because, again, Nick Land doesn't understand how machines work. I think it's very interesting that your critique does not mention this problem, right? This was a core focus in my video. My core focus was is that codes run on machines. And the problem with the current movement is that these the codes that are exploding right now are hiding the core nature of the politics that the machine is running on. Right? You can't just go and say, oh, well, accelerationism was good to begin. No, it wasn't. Nick Land's core problem, which I point out in the video, is that he does not acknowledge the machines. As Guattari has said in interviews before, they do not love machines. Nick Land didn't love machines. He didn't understand anything about how computers work. He didn't understand anything about any of that stuff. He, to me, like, as somebody who actually, like, spent a whole career working in computers, but not only that, but also thinking very deeply about the interaction between user interface and machines, right? It's obvious to me that Nick Land has never considered any of these things, right? And that's a core part of my critique of Nick Land. Accelerationism was doomed from the beginning because, one, it didn't acknowledge Guattari, and two, it doesn't acknowledge that codes run on machines. And Nick Land specifically makes a point in multiple of his essays in Phenomena that he dismisses Guattari. So no, accelerationism was not something that got ruined by reactionaries. And by the way, Nick Land was always reactionary. He was always a shithead. Like, just because he became open about it because it's cool now on the internet doesn't mean that he wasn't, like, a dumb racist asshole back then. Like, I definitely can see it in his text back then. It's just that he's a lot more like, whoa, what if computer this or rhizome that? Like, fuck off, dude, right? Like, seriously, accelerationism was never fucking good to begin with. This is why I advocate for a return to Guattari, because none of y'all listen to him, right? And that's the core problem, right? So, serving ordered systems, it's not because Nick Land misunderstood DG. No, yes, it is. It is actually. He did misunderstand DG. And most people who are experts in DG agree with that assessment. But I do agree with PF that it has been hijacked for their purposes. In other words, much like the rhizome has been captured, just like Culp noted in Dark Deleuze, serving the institutes it sought to escape. I will say that I'm not familiar personally with Culp's work. Andrew Culp, for those who don't know, Dark Deleuze. Again, I'm stressing right now. I can tell you don't read Guattari, okay? I can tell. Because if you did, this like, this is the whole problem, okay? All right, so he does continue a little further. I'm going to pause for a second. I'll be... All right, I'm back. So let's talk about point 3. He says, a lack of Landian insight and deathly delights. I agree there are flaws in Land's thinking, which we've since discussed on this channel, especially in our Dark Enlightenment playlist. And yes, as PF notes, Land is quite cryptic. But I suppose I've always liked decrypting such texts. Now, a problem, in my opinion, with having a cryptic philosophical text is that there's pretty much 1,000,001 ways that you can interpret it. Right? Like, people say that Guattari is really, really difficult to understand and really, like, cryptic or whatever, but, like, no, when you actually read him, he kind of forms, like, a structure that you can kind of understand, right? But when you're cryptic, there is a high chance that you're going to actually produce multiple models. And this is part of the reason why I believe that Land's, approach is reactionary and enables reactionaries. Because being cryptic, being indirect, making something that can be interpreted in 1,000,001 different ways, right? Especially when you're not just trying to be an artist, but you're trying to really start a movement, like really try to do whatever, right? You're really opening the door to people interpreting it any which way they want. So, your interpretation, your decryption of land is not land. It's more you than it is land. And that's also true for my interpretation of Guattari. But the difference is that the discourse surrounding Guattari generally has like structures that we can kind of agree with and communicate with. Like, um, we generally agree with like what something like deterritorialization is or an existential territory is because we can reference the texts. We can, and Guattari does evolve over time, and he's very much a guy that's trying to produce concepts. So like his ideas change over time, but like for the most part you can kind of understand what these ideas are, and you can construct an idea that can be shared with other people. But that's not what Land is trying to do. Land is trying to deliberately be cryptic because he's more so offering a reflection to the reader, right? Which is why not every Land reader is reactionary necessarily, right? Some and I don't judge people for reading Land because Land can be interpreted in 1,000,001 ways. That's the problem though. Anyone can pick up this shit and, interpret it in any which way. And when you're carrying in all of the problems with not reading Guattari along with it, it's a recipe for disaster. Anyways, but we should be clear that Land is not purely a schizoanalytic thinker. No shit. Which is why he differs from DG in terms of certain concepts. Something that PEF does not understand, since, as he admits, he struggles with Land's writings. I do actually understand this concept of Land. I just don't agree with it. I'm a Guattarian, okay? Like, I'm very much more in line with Guattari than I am with, like, mixing up a bunch of these authors. I don't have a super strong opinion on a lot of the authors that Land references, but I feel that the particular assemblage that he constructs is not like a particularly useful one, right? And I'll be honest, like I think that the critiques that Land has that are the most valuable, such as the ones where he talks about Kant, these are not critiques that most accelerationists care about. Right? This is actually something that more so people who are not accelerationists who read Land care about, like actual like philosopher types. And two, I'll admit they're outside of my understanding and knowledge, right? So, I'll admit that's a gap. But I am aware that Land is not a Deleuze-Guattarian. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Land doesn't understand Deleuze and Guattari because he deliberately, and he stresses this in multiple of his essays that I pointed out in that video, he deliberately ignores and undermines the value of Guattari. This is the whole problem with accelerationism. They don't put on the brakes because they didn't listen to the guy who was actually working with schizos. All right, so he's also heavily reliant on other thinkers. Yeah, I know, as well as science figures. And as far as making it with death is concerned, the whole idea of death is linked to the notion of rebirth. I understand this, all right? But do you really think you're going to be reborn if you deterritorialize everything? No. Look at what's happening right now. They're trying to deterritorialize the state right now, right? These fucking Elon bros, they're trying to go and deterritorialize the whole state, right? And the reality is that the rebirth is going to be in their name. It's the reterritorialization is going to be in their image. And quite frankly, I don't even think they're going to succeed. I think that they're going to, they're going to collapse because they're going too fast. That's kind of the core problem with accelerationism, repeatedly in both Guattari and Deleuze and Guattari, they criticize this idea of absolute deterritorialization. They criticize this idea of trying to embrace death. Why? Because you're breaking down every single structure you have. I think a good way to think of this is something called the Permian-Triassic extinction event, right? This is an event that happened 251 million years ago that killed almost all life on this planet, right? Now, it's true. There was a rebirth afterwards. The Triassic had a bunch of crazy shit going on in it, right? But almost every single ecology was completely wiped out. It took like 20 million years for life to even recover any level of the diversity that it had. Like, yeah, that's the thing that happened. Yeah, that's the thing that shaped the world the way it is. But do you really think we should be encouraging that? Do you really think that that's the answer to everything? Because I think like part of the problem here too is that these people don't like care about like things outside of human affairs, right? They don't care that we live in ecology, like we literally live on a living planet. And part of the issue right now is that because we're accelerating, we're literally heating up the planet and we're gonna die. Like that's what the three ecologies is about. Come on, read Guattari, right? But like like do you really think that burning up the planet and destroying 96% of life on the planet and like 70% of genera is really going to produce the future that you want? Because most likely humans are just going to die because paleontologically speaking, large species do not survive extinction events. Like, we're gonna all just die. Like, is that really what you want? You really think that's gonna produce the future you want? I mean, yeah, maybe return a monkey, but you're not returning a monkey. You're gonna be dead, and so are your children. So, yeah, I disagree with that. Let's continue. Death is not an end, but like the zero, and a beginning for a new rebirth. It is the virtual egg of potentiality. Via hyperstition, fictions turn into facts, conjured like a Lovecraftian creatures into creation. Again, how is the machine supposed to produce these? The machine has deterritorialized everything to fucking dust. There's nothing left. Again, read the three ecologies, read schizoanalytic cartographies. And thus the endless act of becoming other. To land, with advancements in AI, we will deterritorialize faster than we can reterritorialize, leading to a sense of runaway or escape, from which the human security system of organization gets hacked, as it were, ensuring nothing human really survives in the 21st century. We don't need AI to do that. We're already going to die because of, just ecology and stuff. Again, Land doesn't give a shit about anything like outside. He doesn't care about grass. So it is a nihilistic outlook that forces on ecstatic death and desire. This is where Bataille comes in. To Bataille, the excess of the sun notes the need for man to waste his excess through destructive indulgences, like eroticism, war, sacrifice, where, much like in the film Hellraiser, the border between pain or suffering, as PF states, I say suffering in reference to Peter Singer, and pleasure is blurred due to man reaching a limit experience. Much like Rimbaud, noted with poetry, language has its limits and breaks down at that point. To Land, this is where Kant's noumena comes into play, a transcendental outsideness that goes beyond human understanding and sense perception. AI is thus the techno-capital or phenomenon that turns us into it from the outside by the way of parasitic and vampiric bite, reliant not upon semiotics, but upon algorithmic expression. One, I appreciate you for at least explaining Nick Land for one thing. Like, fucking finally, it took 5 fucking years for one of you assholes to do it. Thank you. I actually do genuinely appreciate the explanation of what Land is going for. I disagree with him because, again, he doesn't care about the physical machines that produce it. This is why you have to read Guattari, and why dismissing Guattari repeatedly in your work doesn't work. But again, I appreciate very much the explanation here, because this is an explanation that nobody's been able to provide me for 5 fucking years. And that's largely because most accelerationists are reactionaries. So thank you very much. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. I genuinely mean that, right? I still disagree with the assertion, but I would need more time to actually explain why, because, that is actually a good explanation of, what's going on here. So, where were we? much like a Lovecraftian horror tale or Cronenberg movie, we become the other as if it were through a static desire and the BWO, shamanistically connecting to the nominal outside, the Lovecraftian creature that, like the people of Innsmouth, turns us into it. Man becomes the machine until full automation takes over, and thus AI, via algorithm, advances forward, potentially without us, becoming the new step in the evolutionary chain. How is it supposed to do that? What machines is it running on? Like, seriously, if you collapse all of ecology, there's not going to be any machines for any of this to run on. Again, that's the problem. That's why codes run on machines, bro. Let's see. Let's go back. Much like how through language mankind evolved beyond the instinctual animal who operates solely on genes instead of both genes and memes like mankind. This is incorrect. There's plenty of examples of animals. Animals are, just in general, like neurology in general is more like a sort of like surface for potentials, expressions. And this is where Dawkins is wrong. Dawkins is dead wrong about memes and genes being separate because, first off, animals absolutely do transmit social repetition and behaviors, which is something that actually Dawkins does recognize in his texts, right? And second, let me grab my thoughts again. Susan Blackmore. Yeah, I'm not listening to fucking memetics, which is literally fake bullshit based on, again, the same criticism that I made in the video, that you are producing a dualism between the machine and the language because you want to believe that the language can operate without the machine. Isn't this the same problem that Guattari criticized Lacan of? Lacan was trying to make this abstract structuralism that, abstracted further and further, how the psychology works, right? And I'm not saying that Lacan completely denied the impact of, neurology or anything like that. But I am saying that, when you try to convert everything to a language and ignore the production of the machine, this is how you get shit like this, right? So again, no, memes are not real. Because memes are not separate from the production of, they're not separate from desiring production, okay? Like genes, memes, sociological repetitions, etc., they're all interconnected, okay? There's no separation. And animals do experience these same sociological developments. There's so many examples of animals transmitting sociological structures that could not be replicated just from genes. This is just ignorant of biology, pretty much anything modern produced in the last 25 years, right? Just on the top of my head, there is a study about a specific kind of songbird that in North America spread a new form of a song within 10 years, which is literally impossible through genes. They're machines, okay? They're not genes. They're not this system of genes and memes. And this is, again, the core thing that I am criticizing in the video. What are the machines running on? Or what are the codes running on? They're running on machines. You get it? Okay, here we go. Does this make accelerationism just postmodernism 2.0 as PF states? No, I don't think so, because both philosophies have completely different aims and approaches, despite accelerationist thought relying on some postmodern thinkers. It is true that accelerationism does have a different intent than postmodernism, but my point is not that they are the same. My point is that they repeat the same fucking problems because they don't acknowledge the same critique that Guattari makes in schizoanalytic cartographies. Like, fuck, this has been going on for 40 years now. It's almost as if that listening to this guy is the whole problem that you guys have, right? So we must remember that accelerationism has no goals or aims, since, much like Matthew 6:34, tomorrow can take care of itself. Yeah, that's what makes it reactionary, relying upon the nomenon. And it is here that we can then again connect the Kantian perspective along with this way of thinking, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, so yeah, you're just revealing to me that, it is a reactionary approach to politics. Like, you're not really convincing me that like accelerationism doesn't solve these problems. In fact, you're reinforcing the idea that it doesn't. Now, I need to take more. I can't respond to this like directly in a video just because I would really want to like actually research more deeply the implications of this problem of nomina. But I genuinely feel like I am circling in on a serious, legitimate critique of accelerationism through what is being presented here. And the fact that this author is not comprehending that codes run on machines demonstrates that they also don't really understand. They also don't really understand Deleuze and Guattari, especially Guattari, because these codes run on machines. That's the whole point of desiring production, right? Like, you can't just like throw all these guys together and say, ooh, this is what it all means, right? Like, no, there's a reason why Deleuze and Guattari disagreed with the postmodernists, and there's a reason why they disagreed with Baudrillard. There's a reason why Guattari disagreed with Baudrillard and Lyotard, right? And all these other guys. There's a reason why they scuffled, because Guattari is actually very different from these guys, right? He has a very materialist conception of understanding these problems. He believes that language does not just float around. It's not just automated by AI and bullshit. AI runs on machines. And the thing is that these physical machines that AI is running on are not going to exist in 100 years, because we're all going to be dead if we keep going this way, or at least like 1,000 years, maybe not 100 years, but within 1,000 years. If we keep this up, we're going to all die, right? That's the point. Read the three ecologies, read schizoanalytic cartographies, okay? If you can understand all of this, you can understand at least those core arguments. I mean, the functors are pretty hard, okay? Like, we're still trying to figure out what the fuck he was on about with the functors and all that shit. But the core stuff that he's getting at, you can understand that, all right? An oligarchic agreement. I agree about the technological hellscape we are heading into, but such is what happens when man attempts to immaternize the Eshtekon. Oh my God, words. Yet, even when we look to Peter Thiel and even when we look to Peter, oh my God, my pronunciation, excuse me. Yet, when we look to Peter Thiel and Project 2025's and Yarvin's Butterfly Revolution, PF must understand the Christian or perhaps anti-Christian framework where the apocalypse or the end times heralds in a new utopian heaven or paradise. Except it doesn't. We're all just gonna die. Like, I don't see it as a Christian revolution. Like, I think Christianity is wrong about that. Like, we're all just gonna die. Like, what machines are AI gonna even be able to run on, right? Now, I mean, if you're gonna interpret it, like, if you want to interpret it, there's one way you could potentially interpret this in a way that actually does acknowledge the ecology, right? Let's say we create a new Permian-Triassic extinction event, right? It is true that AI and the consequences of accelerationism will be embedded into life on this planet from then on forward, right? But that's not that AI is going to take over. It's not that AI is going to exist. All those semiotics are going to collapse because there's nothing able to produce them anymore, right? It's just that we're going to be reduced to, like the few hundred species that survive and have to reconstruct the ecosystem off of. Like, these computers are not going to exist anymore. What's going to run the computers if we're all going to be dead? What's going to run the ecosystem when 96% of life is dead? I'm dead fucking serious. Like, these people act like we don't exist in like a world that has an outside. You talk all the time about outsidedness, but none of y'all motherfuckers step outside and look around you and see that birds are disappearing, insects are disappearing, the ecologies around us are disappearing. Humans will try to survive, but there's a very likely chance that we won't if we keep going the direction that we're going. This is not a rebirth. This is death. Learn about the natural history of the world. You care about God so much. Why don't you care about God's creations and what God has actually created? The record is written in stone. You know, you go and believe in the records that God wrote in stone mentioned in the Bible, but what about the records that God wrote in stone in the stones in the earth that we've been studying for hundreds of years now? How can you not see, you know, the record that God has laid out for us in ice cores? Those are not real to you because you believe in semiotic land. That's the reason why this is postmodernism 2.0. It's not because your intents are the same. You just land to the same conclusion because you made the same fucking mistakes. Let's keep going. Thiel has expressed his own thoughts on apocalyptic thinking in an interview with the Hoover Institution, which I'll also link. Yeah, he's a psycho. Still, as the age-old saying goes, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay, that's true. Then again, utilitarianism has never been the primary goal of the billionaire class. Altruism is but a guise that allows them to openly exploit people for profit. I would actually argue that utilitarianism is not the goal of... They're not ethically, morally guided people. Utilitarianism instead is a model that allows them to essentially justify their behavior. Like, you know, we're making the world a better place because we are improving the organization of utility. So it's not their goal; it's just part of their machine. So again, you don't understand what I'm saying. The whole point of these freedom cities, which Texas will seemingly embrace with Musk's Starbase City or micronation, is to privatize and deregulate the government so as to allow capitalism to operate uninhibited by the human security system of organization. So the same shit that Henry Ford was trying to pull 100 years ago. Not innovative, just a new coat of paint. A dystopia under the guise of utopia is being developed here, where democracy dies in favor of dictatorship. Okay, I agree with that. Returning us back to a feudal society of serfdom, which I agree with, run and regulated by the elite and oligarch class. While land combated against the cathedral, it seems, as PF notes, that their own philosophy has become part of the cathedral itself. Which is basically what we stated earlier in our Dark Enlightenment series. I suppose there is much irony to be noted on how one can be captured within the confines of a system that preaches escape. Okay, I agree with that. So, I don't really think that the video is probably going to go over anything else besides this. I think this is maybe the script that he's sharing. So, yeah, that's my critique of the response to this. I hope that explains things a little bit better and explains my frustrations. And quite frankly, I'm not a fan. But I do appreciate, thank you so much for giving me the groundwork to continue my critique more thoroughly of Nick Land, because I think you have indicated some really useful points of critique. And to be quite blunt, I'm going to continue fighting these ideas until I am taken down. So